Good evening, class. Going to go through a kind of review for your final exam. It's not sure it's going to be as difficult as some final exams have been, but it's going to be challenging to some extent. So let's jump in and talk about it. And we'll start out talking about interest rates and bond prices. And remember, they provide you a formula in the text that says interest rates equals face value of the bond minus the bond price divided by the bond price times 100. That's how you calculate the interest rate. And a little trick, if you want to play with a little math magic here, remember when we talked about rate of change, old, talking about going from an old one to a new one. So if you think about it, and we said rate of change, it was new minus old divided by old times 100. And on rate of change, we said, well, if you wanted to simplify, do a little math magic, you could do new divided by old, get your ratio, minus 1 times 100. And that would get you rate of change. It's the same thing if you want to play a little math magic with your bond pricing and interest rates. And if you take that face value minus bond price divided by bond price times 100 and a little math magic, distill it down, you can end up with a formula that says face value divided by bond price minus 1 times 100 gets you your interest rate. So a lot of ways to get answers to when you're trying to calculate interest rates. Some of them may be a little straightforward. And when it comes to it, again, on the math side, on any of these problems, or if any question on a test doesn't make sense to you, sit down, take a deep breath, and think through the math. Or sit down, take a deep breath, whip out your pencil, do your supply and demand curve. And everything, you can distill a lot of this stuff down just to supply and demand curves and play around with them and move them, and you'll get to the answer that you need. Just don't do like some students, and when they see math on the other side, oh, it's math, I'm never going to make it. The math in both the principles of microeconomics and the principles of macroeconomics in these two texts, it's just basic algebra. There's no high-powered calculus. You're not doing differentials, it's just not that difficult. Always remember that when it comes to bond prices and interest rates, so price of bonds on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal, calculate your interest rates. But what you'll see is there is this inverse relationship between bond prices and interest rates. Bond prices go down, interest rates go up. Bond prices go up, interest rates go down. If bond prices go up and interest rates go down, you're going to actually increase capital stock. You're going to potentially increase aggregate demand and potentially increase investment. So you'll understand as you go along, all of these up and down arrows are all tied together, and it's what the government is using through monetary policy and fiscal policy to help manage aggregate supply, aggregate demand, potential output, and we'll get into that a little later. Actually, in this final, we're going to get into it, but that's the way the government's looking at it, and that's the way the government's going to try to manage it. And if you look at the price of bonds, it's the same thing with the quantity of bonds. Moving along that demand curve, think your way through it. Remember, price of bonds goes up. What happens to interest rates? Interest rates go down. If interest rates go down, what happens to investment? Investment goes up, right? Price of bonds come down. interest rates go up, investment goes down. The exchange rate is the price of one country's currency in terms of another country's currency. Buy foreign goods with the local currency. Anybody ever been overseas? Or anybody ever been outside the United States? Go outside the United States. Let's say, even if you just want to go to Canada, if anybody wants to go to Canada, but especially, I don't know who'd want to go to Mexico, but if you want to go to Mexico, once you get across the border, you're going to have, I guess, Mexico's pesos, and I guess in Canada it's Canadian pound. I haven't actually thought that much about it. Been to Canada a few times, but I've always used a credit card. But when you go, especially if you go overseas, so you fly into Charles de Gaulle, and one of the first things you see is, everybody is standing there at the currency exchange, either a little kiosk getting some, transfer and getting some euros, or they've got, some of the machines you stick your credit card in and, buy at that point, $500 or $600 worth of euros. But everybody's buying it because if you don't use your credit card, you're going to have cash in that country's currency. Actually, since the European Union's gone into effect, any of those countries in that European Union makes it fairly simple, because let's say you fly into Frankfurt, Germany, or you fly into Madrid, or anywhere that uses a euro, and you can get your euros there and spend them all over the EU. If you go to England, you're still going to have British pounds and stuff like that, but still, it makes things simple. But one thing you've got to do, if you go to a foreign country and you want to buy foreign goods, you're really going to have to use a credit card. And then once it comes back to your bank, they're going to calculate the exchange rate. And they usually, with the bank's going to shortchange you on the exchange rate. But anyway, that's how it works. Or you're going to go to a currency trader or a currency exchange, and you're going to turn in some American dollars for whatever the currency is in that country that you're visiting. And when you talk about exchange rate and quantity of dollars per period, when you're talking about the demand for US dollars, you're typically talking about the foreigner's demand for US currency. Or if you're just talking about the demands and supply for quantity of dollars in any period, you're talking about a foreigner's demand for the local currency. And let's think about the exchange rate. As the exchange rate in the US goes higher, the price of the US goods for foreigners goes higher. The demand for US goods by foreigners go down, and fewer US dollars are demanded by foreigners because they don't want to buy our goods. Now, if the exchange rate goes up, that means the price of foreign goods for us as a US customer goes down. The demand for foreign dollars by US buyers goes up, and the demand for foreign currency demanded by US buyers goes up. So exchange rate drives the price of goods, it drives the demand for goods, and it drives the demand for dollars of the local currency. And again, if you have trouble with that, just sit down and draw it out. Exchange rate in the US goes up, means the price of our goods to foreigners go up. The demand for our US goods goes down because foreigners don't have to pay the higher price. And the demand for US dollars is going to go down because foreigners don't want our dollars because they don't want to buy our goods. And the flip side is the same thing. You can go in reverse when you're talking about imports. And let's go back to the bonds now. See how the bonds play into this. If bond prices go down, the price of the US dollar goes up, the price of interest rates goes up, and the local or foreign investors demand more US dollars because they see higher interest rates and see the opportunity to make more money in the United States. So they're going to buy our US dollars to invest here in the United States. Again, goes back to bond prices and interest rates are driving a lot. Motives for holding money: transactional demand, buy goods and services. Again, Starbucks coffee, Big Mac at McDonald's, beer at the local bar. Precautionary demand: people hold some money back. In most economies, they hold money back. Over the last couple of years, it's been really tough on people to hold a lot of funds in precautionary demand because they just haven't had the money. Inflation has been rampant, and it's been tough on all of us. But typically, precautionary demand is for contingencies. If you own a home, it's in case you have an issue with your roof, your hot water heater goes out, your air conditioning unit goes out, or your heater goes out. You keep some money aside, or you have trouble with your car. You keep some money aside to take care of those. And then you've got speculative demand. And those are the individuals that are holding money because they think there's going to be a change in the bond market, or they think there's going to be a change in the stock prices. And so they're holding a little. It's speculative. It's they're gambling money. They may hold a little speculative back. They think they're going to Las Vegas, or if you're going to a casino on an Indian reservation. I mean, that was a huge deal in Buffalo when I worked there. Was people love to go to the casinos. They love to get on the casinos there on the Indian reservations, or they like to go across into Canada and gamble. That was a huge draw. See what else? The United States and most countries, most global countries, but the United States in general, the government manages fiscal policy, and it's the power to tax and the power to spend or waste money, depending on how you want to look at it. The central bank, which is the Federal Reserve for us in the United States, manages monetary policy, changes to the money supply and credit. And both fiscal policy and monetary policy is utilized either by the government or the central bank to fight recessionary and inflationary gaps. Goals of monetary power. So the central bank, the Federal Reserve, are trying to drive full employment. They're trying to manage excess inflation or deflation, and they're trying to grow potential GDP. And I think the authors came to the conclusion in the text that historically it seems that the Federal Reserve has been focused on managing inflation. And if you think over the last, 18 months, what's the Federal Reserve been doing? They've been bumping up rates. They've been bumping up the interest rates, trying to put a damper on the inflationary issues, and especially the inflation rates that we've been trying to live through. When you're talking about tools of monetary policy, you've got what they call open market operations. So the Federal Reserve can buy and sell bonds. They can change the discount rates. They can, change the reserve requirements. Of course, discount rates and reserve requirements are issues with the banks. They can change interest rates payable to banks on the reserve holdings. So there's a lot of things that central bank can do when they're trying to work on monetary policy. And when I'm talking about if the Federal Reserve decides to buy bonds on the open market, so let's say they're wanting to expand the economy, they decide to buy bonds on the open market, they bid up, they want to buy bonds, so they're going to bid up the price of bonds, going to lower the interest rates. It's going to increase the money supply, right? More money available. And as it increases the money supply and the interest rate goes down, it, in theory, boosts consumption. In theory, it boosts investment. If the Federal Reserve decides to sell bonds on the open market, selling bonds because they're flooding the market now, bonds, it lowers the price of the bonds. Bonds go down. What do the interest rates do? Interest rates go up. It reduces the money supply. Interest rates up, money supply down, probably not as much consumption spending and investment opportunities. So that's contractionary. That's on the contractionary side when they're trying to what they call cool off the market, cool off growth. Expansionary, they're trying to jumpstart growth. So remember, the Central Reserve or the central bank, Federal Reserve for us, can either buy or sell bonds on the open market, and that's the impact that it has on the open market. If they're trying to expand growth, trying to expand, jumpstart the economy, they may be buying bonds. If they're trying to cool it off, trying to take care of some of this really hot inflation, they're going to be selling bonds. And remember, it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the class. There is a direct relationship between price level and money supply, right? Price level goes up when the money supply goes up. Price level comes down when the money supply comes down. Remember, we talked about it. The issue with inflation, too many dollars chasing too fewer goods. Let's see if there's anything else. Well, a couple of more things. And remember, we talked about in one of the earlier classes, talked about the difference between government purchases and government spending. Government purchases, there's a subset of government spending. Government spending, about 50% of it is actually driven by what we call transfer payments, pensions, Social Security, subsidy payments. Again, EBTs, food stamps, WIC programs, those kinds of subsidies. The government, again, drives fiscal policy, and the central bank drives monetary policy. And they're using these two tools to do what? To steer the economy toward its potential output. That's what they're always trying to do, is to steer the economy. Categories of government spending: government purchases, transfer payments, and net interest, the big three. Again, government purchases, transfer payments, net interest, your big three when it comes to categories of government spending. Remember, the government purchases is that component of GDP. It's a component of aggregate demand. And again, it is part of government purchases as a subset of government spending. And then the authors talk for just a few minutes, not a lot of time, on taxes. Even though this is the time of year that I just almost makes me anxious and angry, it just almost makes me sick at my stomach thinking about having to pay income tax. I'm paying, federal income tax. I'm paying Georgia state income tax. I'm paying, property tax. I'm paying, Medicare. So, I feel like I'm taxed to the point. Sometimes you even think, why do you even work? I know why we have to work. I know why everybody has to work. But just tax time is just, to me, just extremely depressing. Federal tax receipts usually come from income tax, payroll tax, personal income tax, corporate taxes, or it comes from excise taxes. Think about excise taxes: alcohol, gasoline, cell phone service. All of those are excise taxes. State and local tax receipts: property tax, sales tax, some fees and grants, and there'll be some state income tax, and there'll be some state excise tax, but the majority of taxes on the state level come from property tax and sales tax. You're lucky if you live in states like Tennessee, Florida, Texas, Nevada, Washington, seem like one of the Dakotas, where they don't have any state income tax. Because you live in those states, you automatically, your disposable income takes a significant bump. And lastly, if you increase GDP, what happens to tax revenues? Increase GDP, tax revenues go up. That's why the government is concerned if, depending on how they manage the tax law, that if they're facing a surplus, which it's been a long time since we've had a surplus, now we're in a deficit. But if they're facing a deficit, they want the GDP, they want their potential output to keep cooking, because as potential output's going up, potential tax revenues are going up too. And I think that's it for your final. The videos have been helpful. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out and touch base with me. Talk to you later. Thank you.